Hey everybody, Josh Fields of Miles and Mountains Coaching, and we're going to talk today about traction devices for winter running. So there are a lot of different products available on the market, and they excel in a little bit different situation for each type. So we're going to talk about the different types, where they might be the best choice for your running, and sometimes when you may not, in fact, need them at all. So let's talk about the simplest method, and that is just wearing a trail shoe. Trail shoes are designed for looser conditions, and if you have certain types of snowy conditions, they can work just fine. I often use trail shoes on the road when I'm running in a snowstorm where there's a dusting, maybe there's some blowing snow, but it's not all snow covered. And they work just fine for that. There's just enough less surface area that you're not going to slide as much. You still have traction. Other circumstances where they might work is fairly well packed but not icy trails. So packed snow, and if it's just soft enough, especially in slightly warmer conditions, you may be able to get away with just a trail shoe. I would not use this as my first choice, but if you have a bunch of different options and you know that the trail shoe will work, go for it. So the next kind of simplest way to do things, and certainly the cheapest way, is to grab some of these. And these are sheet metal screws. This particular is number 6 by half an inch. There are a lot of different sizes that you can use depending on really how thick the cushioning in your shoe is. So the thinner the cushioning, obviously you need to go with a thinner screw. Personally, I like shoes with a rock plate in it, which would be many trail shoes. A lot of ultra shoes have a removable rock plate, but other trail shoes have it integrated. And the reason why is that you do feel a little bit of pressure points. You don't actually feel a screw poking into your foot, but there's some pressure there, and we'll talk about kind of the best placement, and the best placement relies on having fairly few of these screws. So pros, you can get 100 screws for like $5. You can do a bunch of different types of shoes if you want. You can replace them, and we'll talk about why you need to do that. These are a good kind of cheap option. They work really well, again, on fairly packed snow trails. They don't work well on very uniform surfaces. So if you're running on a road that has black ice, do not use these. You will almost certainly fall. But if it's a rough surface where it doesn't have to so much bite into ice, but bite into firmer snow and things like that, these can work pretty well. I have a pair good to go at all times, and I use them probably a third of the time when I'm running in winter conditions. All you're really doing with the screw shoe is you're screwing into, and if you're using a trail lug, make sure you go into the lug, and you just screw these in. Normal drill. These particular ones are hex head. You can get flathead. I personally like the hex head. It's a little bit easier to work with. You don't deal with the head slipping out. But all you're going to do is screw them in until they're in and protruding just the amount of the cap. Now the problem with these is that they're not very sharp, and you could sharpen them. You could use a Dremel tool or maybe even a file and sharpen them, but they are softer steel. They're not going to last very long. So if you do that, just be aware that you're going to have to replace these. In my experience, every few runs, if you're relying them on pretty slippery surfaces. If you're using them more just to augment a trail shoe on rough surfaces that are packed snow and things like that, you may be fine. Now the next option is another way of modifying your shoe, and this is carbide studs. So these are hardened material that are much smaller and therefore have much more bite into really true icy surfaces. So these are great for icy pavement. These are great for icy sidewalks, mix of ice and snow. Really awesome choice. They're a little bit more expensive, but make sure you save your tool. You can pull these studs out and reuse them with multiple pairs of shoes. These are basically the same as you would get as a tire stud for studded snow tires or for fat biking, things like that. So they're very hardy. They're very sharp. Not sharp to your finger, but sharp enough to cut into the ice, much more so than the screws. With both of these methods, with something that you're modifying the shoe, there are a couple of considerations that you want to think about. And the first is how many you're actually going to put on. And most people just think, well, more is better. Not the case, because really what you're doing is you're dealing with forces and pressure. So the more force, your body weight, you are putting on a smaller area, the more pressure and the more bite. Think about a dull knife versus a very sharp knife. Okay, so you want a very small surface area in order to have bite into the snow or the ice. So if you're a lighter person, you want to err on the side of having fewer. Make sure they're evenly spread. I find 7 to 12, depending on what you're doing. With the screws, fewer. With the studs, you can get by with a little more just because they're so much smaller. Okay, they're about 1 millimeter across versus 1/4 inch. That's a big difference. So you want to make sure you have some obviously on the heel, the midfoot, and the toe. Do not neglect the very, very tip, because that is what will contact last on the ground as you toe off, and if you don't have a stud there, it will slip backwards. I learned that the hard way. So even though it may not be touching the ground as you land, you do want a stud right there at the toe. So these again are grip studs. La Sportiva makes hobnails that are essentially the same idea, about the same price. If you can find those, you can certainly use them. These are probably my #1 go-to solution for roads and roads to trails. These are much, much better than pretty much anything else that you can do. So the next option is to strap something onto your shoe. So this is something that's obviously much more easily removable. And the one most people know a lot about are Yaktrax. I don't recommend Yaktrax with the coils. They really are not designed for movement. If you're shoveling your driveway, walking gingerly around, they might be fine, but they're really not designed to bite in enough. And again, it comes down to that surface area and your weight. So if you imagine all of those coils, that's way more surface area than even the screws. And it's not very sharp, they're rounded. So what I recommend for trail runners, I recommend Microspikes or Ultra Crampons. These are Hillsound Ultra Crampons. Microspikes are very, very similar product. These are awesome. They are awesome on ice. They are awesome on packed snow. They're awesome on fairly loose snow. They're a little bit of extra precaution. They kind of bite down through the snow onto whatever's underneath. They don't work well on roads. I've done it. Your feet are not going to be happy. So don't use them on roads. But for trails, packed snow, ice, these are the absolute must-have if you're running lots of trails in the winter. They're necessary. Don't get caught without them. Now, there are strap-on carbide studs as well. So carbide studs, like the grip studs, there are kind of, I've seen carbide studs in the front and coils in the back. Again, I would stay away from them. It's a slight step up, but just go straight to carbide studs that strap on. Again, I really, it's something else underfoot. They'll work on roads theoretically, but then you have rubber under your feet as well. I really prefer modifying the shoes when I can. Again, this shoe is barely noticeable. I can go out and run on the road, and other than a little click, click, clack sound, it is not noticeable at all. And then if I hit a patch of ice, that's great. So whenever I am at all concerned about ice or black ice or blowing snow on the roads, I go with the grip studded shoes. I put them in trail shoes just for a little bit extra. They certainly work well in road shoes as well. What they won't work well on is a foam-soled shoe. So make sure you're putting it into rubber. If you're putting it into foam, the foam deforms too easily on the bottom. So you're getting that contact area of foam rather than the stud. So as long as you're screwing into rubber, whether it be a road shoe or a trail shoe, you should be just fine. So for trails, I really recommend Microspikes or a similar solution. You can certainly get by, if you only run some trails in the winter, you can certainly get by with just screw shoes. They really do work pretty well on trails. If you're running repeatedly, several runs a week on trails with the screw shoes, they may wear out. You may eventually want to either sharpen those or remove them, but they are cheap. So if you have a little extra time in your hands, it could be a cheap way to go. Microspikes, of course, are excellent. And for roads, I highly recommend the grip studs or carbide studs that you strap on can work as well. What I don't recommend is the coil traction devices. They are, in my opinion, dangerous for running. And again, at the end of the day, if all you have is a trail shoe, it may work. Take care, guys, and stay tuned for the next video.